Good evening, all of you. Before we start, actually, I would like to call Mr. Manas Bakshi, who is the curator and project coordinator of the center, to formally welcome all of you. Sir, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ganguly, and a very warm welcome to all the viewers, and particularly my heartfelt thanks to Arvindji, who has kindly consented to be the guest speaker today. And Arvindji is known to me, though we have not met for a long time, but he is known to me for eternity, it seems. Even since 90s we used to know each other, and when he did set up some laboratory in St. Xavier's College in Kolkata, we worked in workshop together for some time, and later on also I met him in the Ayuka outreach center. So it's going on, and it's a great pleasure and honor to have you here in our program. But before that, for the viewers, apart from being our very close friend and a very knowledgeable person, Arvindji has got many other hats to don. He was a person who devised certain special techniques in astrophotography while working in the lab towards that objective. He has a specialization on finding smaller objects in our solar system, and if my memory serves me right, then there is one which is also named after three of them who together work to find out one particular asteroid. So I remember all such things, and he is the most appropriate person perhaps to talk on the smaller objects in our solar system. In our Astro Adda, we have the objective of making all aware about special techniques and the research works that are going on in the field of astronomy anywhere. But we don't want to make it like a paper presentation, and that is why we call it Adda, which is informal, where knowledgeable people all chip in and discuss certain things, and they organically evolve into some different sphere altogether, and that's how we can help each other perhaps. And it's a very welcome evening to Arvindji. Well, now the forum is all yours, and Mr. Ganguly, you can decide how to proceed with this program. So let the Adda begin.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So now I will just introduce our speaker to the audience before we actually start the Adda as such, the talk. So Arvind Panachpe is presently the director of Nehru Planetarium, Mumbai. He has been an amateur astronomer since his college days. His professional career started as an assistant in the photographic laboratory of Indian Institute of Astrophysics, Bangalore, India in December 1981. Working in the lab mostly alone on his own, he mastered various laboratory and photographic techniques. Conventional photography has now been replaced by digital photography, and he has mastered many aspects of that also. He went 2 years in the extreme arid Himalayan region, September 1984 to August 1986. During this period, he took site survey observations for a high altitude infrared observatory. Upon return from Leh, he was involved in the search for minor objects in the solar system. In 1988, his team became the first Indians to discover a new asteroid that was named as 4130 Ramanujan. The team was awarded the Astronomical Society of India Medal for the discovery of the asteroid. Asteroid 17446, Mopaku, was named after three members of the team, Valankatachala Murthy, Arvind Panachpe, and Kamachiappam Kutpuswamy. The asteroid was discovered on January 23rd, 1990. For a short period of time, Arvind also took some spectroscopic observation using 1 and 2.3 meter telescope at Kavalu. He joined the Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, or IUCA, in April 1991. Initially, he worked on the development of low-cost instrumentation for astronomical observations and carried out the site survey observations. Arvind also had been involved in popular science popularization activity of IUCA since the day it started. Later, he was made in charge of public outreach program of IUCAA. As an amateur astronomer, he had the opportunity to observe and photograph many of the major celestial events. A few of them are total solar eclipse on 16 February 1980 from India, 24th October 1995 from India, 11th August 1999 from Iran, 21st June 2001 from Zambia, 22nd July 2009 from China, which had an overcast sky, and 21st August 2017 from USA. He has also covered annular solar eclipse photographing on 15 January 2010 and transit of Venus on June 8, 2004. He had been contributing to columns or short articles to various newspaper and periodicals on sky observation and astronomy question and answer sessions such as Indian Express, Times of India, Tarun Bharat, Shakal Saptahik, etc. From time to time, he has been on radio and television. Arvind was an expert in science quiz show channel called Chamatkar on Doordarshan, and since 1998-99, he was with that particular program. He had been hosting a live sky show on All India Radio from Pune and Mumbai. As far as publications are concerned of in academic journals, he has about 10 papers on site survey, spectroscopy, occultation, and search for minor objects in the solar system. Arvind completed his MSc degree from Pune University and bachelor's from Bangalore University. So we have a very eminent speaker today. So, sir, now you can proceed.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. And it is almost like homecoming. Many of people from NCSM, Manas ji, you, Jain ji, then I see Bipashda, who has been visiting IUCAA on a number of occasions, Kiran. So it's like once again back in the family. And thank you so much for your kind introduction. Well, friends, I'm really very happy that I'm invited to talk about this a very dear subject to me, that is the minor bodies in the solar system. I can also think that because in the professional world of astronomy, we are the minor bodies, so maybe that is the reason I'm rather closely associated with the minor bodies in the solar system. Well, today what we will do is, I'm not going to use any equations or graphs or something, very technical thing. What I will do is, it's more like a storytelling, as he said that it's a adda, so it's more like a storytelling. So I will go ahead and normally during the live interaction, one would say that, okay, you can raise your hand and then I will answer your question. But today, please allow me to complete my presentation, and then if the time permits, I will answer some questions. So I will begin by sharing my slides. Let me share a slide, my PowerPoint presentation. And if it is not there, then please, once it is there, please prompt me.
Yeah, it's okay. It's fine.
Okay, thank you. Jainji, I cannot see whether the slide is seen there or not. So please do prompt me if this.
It is seen.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. So friends, let's begin. Let's begin with Nicolaus Copernicus. Now, in trying to understand these bodies, let us first understand our solar system, what it is, and begin with Nicolaus Copernicus. See, prior to about 15th century, all people believed that the Earth is the center of the universe. Now, please remember that universe has no center, came much later, only in last 100 years or so. But prior to that, the universe was just limited to the planet and some star at a very long distances, but it ended at that. We had no knowledge of what the galaxies are and so on. In fact, galaxies were fuzzy objects and they were called nebulae. So what Copernicus said was that instead of Earth, sun should be at the center of the universe. And the reason for him to say so is because he was trying to understand and prove mathematically why the retrograde motions of planets take place. What is a retrograde motion? With the respect of stars, a planet appears to move from west to east, but sometime the planet stops, reverses its direction for a while, and then resumes its forward motion. Now, this was not possible to explain easily in the earlier model of solar system, that is Earth being center of the universe, but it was possible. But through the geocentric universe here, that's a sun here and then planets spaced around, it becomes quite easier to explain the retrograde motion. But once he gave this theory, and in this theory, remember that the planets are going around the sun in circular orbit, and why we will come to that very soon. So once he accepted that, another thing that comes out is that distances of planet from the sun comes out very automatically in this. And thirdly, that you could actually calculate distances of planet from the sun in terms of Earth-Sun distance. Even though physically it is not possible for you to measure, but the distance between Earth and the sun and Earth and the other planet comes out absolutely straightforward. So let us see how it happens. Now here I have chosen Sun, Earth and Venus here. So this is the orbit of Earth and this is the orbit of Venus. And we have taken an instance where the line joining from Earth to orbit of Venus is as a tangential to the orbit of Venus. And this is where the Venus is. Now you can make out easily that if Venus is going around the sun like this, then this angle theta would increase and decrease. It would increase and decrease. And at this station only, at this position only, this angle is at maximum. Of course, there is one more position, that is on the other side. If the planet is Venus is here, then again the angle will be maximum. But that will be the maximum angle. Angle will not increase beyond that. And then this line is a tangent to the sun. Now, using simple geometry, you know that if it is a line is tangent to the sun, there's a tangential line to the circle, then to that point and center of the circle, if you join, that is a straight line. And this angle, that is Earth, Venus and Sun angles, become 90 degrees. Now, this becomes a very straightforward trigonometrical solution, trigonometrical answer to it. And that is, if this is a theta, then Vs, that is Venus and Sun distance, that is this thing, is divided by Es, that is the Earth-Sun distance. And if you know theta, then you get Vs out of it. That is the sun and the planet distance. So it becomes an absolutely straightforward way of getting the distances to the planet. Now, for the outer planet, the method is very similar, but it is slightly complicated. Method is again based on right angle triangles, but it's a little complicated and we will not touch that. The point is that using sun-centered universe, you could also get distances of the planet from the sun. Okay. So when they observed this and started calculating the distances came out to be something like this, that the Mercury was at 0.4, or at least, or saying it another way, 40% of the distance between Earth and the Sun. Venus was 70%. Mars was beyond about little more than 1.5 times. Jupiter is little more than 5 times, and Saturn is 10 times. Now, what you see interestingly here is that as you go away from the sun, the distances of planets start increasing. Now, remember, this is the byproduct of Copernicus's proposition that the planets are going around the sun, and automatically you get these distances. Now, Copernicus made an assumption that the planets are going around the sun, but that using Copernicus model, one could not predict the future positions of planet, which was solved by Johannes Kepler. And he gave his 3 laws. First 2 laws were given in 1609. This is just about the time when Galileo started using the telescope. Then the third law was given about quite some time, about 10 years later in 1690. So what the first law was, that the planets are going in an elliptical orbit, okay? And then line joining the sun, line joining a planet and the sun sweeps equal areas in equal intervals of time, like this. Okay, so as the planet sweeps the sun, if there is a time, if I just go back here, sorry. Okay, and what it is telling you is that planet would travel from here to here in certain amount of time and here to here in the same. So these two areas are identical. They are equal areas, okay, as we see here. That's how. And the third law actually connects the period of planet to their semi-distant, their semi-major axis. Now, these three laws would actually help you to completely find out the orbits of the planets and periods of the planet. A period, you know, of course, and then you can the third law tells you that the cube of the period is directly proportional to the semi-major or semi-major axis of the planet. Okay, that is distance. That is the distance of the planet from the sun. Now, this was a proportionality, and constant of proportionality came from Newton's law of gravitation, and in which he published in 1687, which is in the Principia, and he talked about. He gave this law, so laws of motion and Newton's universal law of gravitation, and the constant came in, and one could perfectly give the orbits of the planet. There was no ambiguity, like in the case of geocentric universe or heliocentric universe. Now, little around the same time, there was this very interesting rule which just came up, or law. It was called law. It was a rule which came up by two gentlemen from Germany, Johannes Titius and Johannes Bode. Now, what they gave is they gave a rule how the distances of planets to be remembered or calculated with a particular formula. The formula was like this. If A is the distance of planet from the sun, then you have this equation n plus 4 divided by 10, where n would take value 0, 3, but after 3 you see, notice here you write 0 and 3. After 3 you write double of 3 is 6, double of 6 is 12, double of 12 is 24, 48, 96 and 192, and so on. So you could give the distances to the planet. So if you do that exercise, you find that you can actually get the same numbers. So here it is Mercury, n equal to 0, 0.4. You can put this in equation and check out. Venus is 3, so 0.7. Earth is, of course, 1. Mars is 12. And then what you notice is that there is a gap here for value 24. Now, for this particular n equal to 24, there is a gap. At that point in time, no one really bothered about it, and it was not given any great importance. But yes, there is a gap, and people use this particular law to remember the distances of planets from the sun. But that was to be changed because Sir William Herschel, a very famous astronomer of his time, and he discovered an object on March 13, 1781. Now, he thought that he has discovered a comet, and then people started calculating the orbits of the comet. Now, this is the time where I told you that Newton gave their equation and so on. So you could actually get the orbit of the comet, exact orbit of the comet, and then observations could be fit into that, that mathematical computation of that orbit. And you can actually talk about how that particular object is moving. Now, when he tried to fit the orbit of comet to the observations of this, to his observation of that, what he called it comet, it would not fit, because the cometary orbits are very long elliptical, or sometimes even open elliptical, in the sense that they are parabolic orbits. So this parabolic orbit, it won't fit. But when they fitted this orbit for the new object, what Herschel had called comet as the orbit of a planet, it fit exactly and very accurately. And once they have done it, they were found that this object is beyond Saturn. Now that you could place it beyond Saturn mathematically. And this object came out to be eventually it was called Uranus. And you can see here very clearly that how Uranus has fit into the TTS board's rule. And now what happened was that people started saying, well, there must be some object which is between Mars and Jupiter at 2.8 times distance between Earth and the Sun. Well, today we call this Earth-Sun distance as astronomical unit, which has been taken. At that time, the astronomical unit had not come, but we knew that if you take Earth-Sun distance equal to 1, then this new object should be at 2.8 distance, astronomical distance. Now, this became a very interesting and important issue. There was this Baron, Franz Xavier Zach, who actually thought of searching for this missing planet. And what he did was that he organized a group of 24 astronomers, excuse me, and then they started looking for this missing planet. What they were, their job was, what they were doing was that they made these hand-drawn star charts on the ecliptic, that is the path of the sun, okay, or what you also call the zodiacal belt, and then up to certain limit of observation, that is brightness. So you make a star chart, then every observer is assigned a particular region of the sky, and they have to look for this missing object. Now, how do you look at this? How do you look at this missing object? So if you do the simple calculation, what you find is that if the object is at 3.8 astronomical unit, or 3.8 times the distance between Earth and the Sun, then it would move something like 30 seconds of arc per hour. Now, what is a 1 second of arc? So if you extend your hand and then, if you keep, say, 20 millimeter diameter disc at about 2 kilometers from you, then that disc will subtend approximately 1 second of arc angle. So it's a very small angle. However, in 24 hours, this object would move something like 1,800 arc seconds in 24 hours, or approximately 12 minutes per arc, 12 minutes of arc per day. Now, this is not a very difficult angle to check, because the moon subtends an angle of about 30 minutes of arc. So 12 minutes of arc would be something little less than half the angular diameter of the moon as seen from the Earth. So this much of distance in 24 hours can be very easily seen. So he put this, what he called them, a celestial polis. He put the celestial polis, and they would start looking at it. But the object was actually discovered by another person, Italian, Giuseppe Piazzi, and he discovered this particular object. Now, Giuseppe Piazzi at that time did not know exactly what it was, but he did discover a stellar object, and he thought that he has found a new star. Okay. But when the object moved a little bit over the next few days, it was known that it is not a new star, but a planet. And when they put the observations into the orbits of for planetary orbit, it fitted exactly. And then it turned out that it fitted exactly where 2.8 astronomical distances for the Ceres. He named the planet Ceres for the in honor to his local deity. Now, the solar system seemed to be complete. Okay, there's a little bit story which we will not go into it, but the next planet, that is Uranus, Neptune, which was discovered, it was a mathematical discovery. It's a very interesting story, but we will not go into that, as it does not actually fall into our today's discussion. So Ceres was discovered, but Ceres was very faint compared to all other planets, and soon few more asteroids were discovered by people. The second asteroid discovered was Pallas, then third one was Juno, and fourth one was Vesta. All these planets were too small, very faint, and people actually had some doubt about what kind of objects they are. You see, asteroid had, as a name, had not come at that particular point in time. They were the planets there. So they found, and then they started searching for more such thing, and over some period of time, years, they did not find. And actually, you see that up to 1807, the number of discovered asteroid was 4. Then, quite too late, 5th asteroid was discovered almost after 40 years. But then 40 to 50 years, something like 11 asteroids were discovered or found. Okay, and then in another 5 years, 37 asteroids were seen. So these asteroids were, and they were nearly at the same distance in that particular gap. Now, in 1857, Daniel Kirkwood, actually what he did, he noticed that these asteroids are, in some sense, they're particularly aligned. Okay, I mean, they call the asteroid belt, but it's particularly aligned. And what he explained is that their positions in the orbit from the distance from the sun has some particular order which is associated with Jupiter's gravitational pull. So it is like this, that this is the orbit of asteroid between Mars and Jupiter, and Jupiter is here. So this this asteroid or this object or planet would experience gravitational pull from Sun and Jupiter, a little more by Jupiter being closer to it. Okay. Then when Jupiter and Sun are on the other side, it would get more pull from Jupiter and Sun, and like that it would happen. So what you ended up with this particular gap, and now you see it's a very interesting thing that this corresponds to asteroid orbit whose periods are in integer ratio of Jupiter's orbital period. Let us see how it is. Okay. At this particular gap, which is 2.5, you remember 2.8 is where the TTS board law was telling us that planet should be. So at 2.5, here you have 3 orbits of an asteroid and 1 orbit of Jupiter. So after that happens, the asteroid gets pulled on the one side, okay, and you have a gap. Similarly, 5 orbits, 2 orbits of Jupiter, you have 1 gap here. Then another thing is 7 to 3 and 2 to 1. So these gaps were actually gravitational pulls of Sun and mostly Jupiter on these asteroids. Now, another thing that was happening simultaneously in the world of science, and that is the art of photography was discovered. And art of photography was that something you can capture something from the nature, you can capture and keep, you can preserve it. This is Nicéphore Niépce. He, the French gentleman, actually took, this is the very first picture that ever was taken, which is well preserved, but the art of photography came. And art of photography became extremely useful tool for astronomers because until that period of time, the observations were all naked eye, and it is subjected to human brain, that what you observe and your ability to observe and accurately record it. But photography gave you unbiased view of the unbiased record. Secondly, by taking a photograph for longer period of time, you can actually get fainter and fainter object. Sir John Herschel, the son of William Herschel, also dabbled into photography, and he found a way of making permanent picture, which is sodium thiosulfate. Many of my colleagues here, they have done photography and know about what that photography means. Today's generation probably don't know what it means to go into the photographic lab and how the films are developed. But there was a time where you would buy a film from a shop, take a picture, give the film to the shop photography shop person. He will develop, print, and so on. Well, William Herschel is also credited for using coining the word photography, and which he called the art of recording the light. I mean, photo is a light, and graphy is making a picture. So he coined this word photography. Now, Max Wolf, another astronomer, he pioneered the astrophotography to detect asteroids. Well, there are other people who use this photography for imaging something else, but then he used this photography to record asteroids. So what he was doing was that you looking at different parts of the sky, you observe for a certain period of time now and continuously monitor the sky. So all stars would be together, whereas if there is an asteroid, it would make a small streak and you can discover an asteroid. So this is what Maxwell did, and he did this. He discovered the first asteroid, and then now you see that by 1900, the number increased by almost more than 450. Okay, or rather 463 asteroids were discovered in approximately 1 century. But after that, once you started using photographic technique, after that, the number of the discovery of asteroids started increasing. And by 1950, 1,600 asteroids were discovered. And all these asteroids were mostly at 2.8 astronomical unit, but not all. So what people started thinking at what these asteroids are. People asked this question: was there a planet between Mars and Jupiter which broke for certain reason? In fact, I remember in my childhood, my school days, people were actually thinking and talking about the broken planet between Mars and Jupiter. But then we will talk about that. We will come to that point. But then let us talk about how the solar system was formed. The initial idea or initial thought about solar system was what is called the nebular theory, was given by a wonderful person, René Descartes, who talked about nebular theory, that there is a huge cloud of gas and solar system must have come out of that. We will see that. Okay, and it was later on tried to give a quantitative way by a professional, another mathematician and astronomer, Pierre-Simon Laplace, who started to develop mathematical theory. So what it is telling you is that and which is now acceptable theory of formation of a solar system, or let us talk about stellar system, that is how the stars are born, that you have a huge cloud of gas and dust, and then it starts rotating for some reason. Okay, as it rotates, it shrinks and it rotates. And as it shrinks and rotates, speed starts increasing. So when the speed increases, some part condenses inside, and centrifugal force make it flatten and flatten. And finally, you come out into this shape and various places. Now, please remember here, we will return to this particular model later. And that is, at various places, the planets material coalesce and planets are formed. As far as asteroids are concerned, now astronomers believe that there wasn't sufficient material here to form a planet. So let us see that. So this is the orbit of Jupiter, and this is the what we now today call it as a main belt asteroid. And you know, something like 1 lakh asteroids are known within this belt. And even if you bring everything together, it will not, the material would not be sufficient to make one full moon-size object. Moon is a much smaller object, so you can't, if you put all this material together, you won't make a moon-size object. And Ceres, the first asteroid which was discovered, is about 1,000 kilometers in diameter, and that takes up nearly 30% of total mass. So this is where, so the earlier theory that probably a planet was broken does not stand now to the scrutiny of scientific studies. Okay, so now let us see some types of asteroids which are there in this. So this is the typical asteroid belt, which is here. Asteroids are in this particular belt. And there is a family of asteroids which are called Amor asteroids. And these asteroids are actually, in this field, they cross the orbit of Mars. You see here it's it's a Mars and it's an orbit. So they cross the orbit of Mars. And Apollo asteroids cross the orbit of Earth. Now, why this is important is that the Apollo asteroids from asteroid belt can be potentially threatening to the life on Earth. Because they are crossing. So if Earth and this particular asteroid comes out of the same place and the same time, then it could be quite a difficult thing. And we will see about that later. Then there was an interesting family called Hirayama family, which have a very nearly identical orbits. Both the Hirayama family of asteroids, there are 2 asteroids having almost identical orbits. And now what is believed is that possibly there were the 2 asteroids which collided with each other, and now they are traveling in the same orbit, or they have the similar orbit, or they are binary asteroids, but they are rotating around each other. Now, going ahead, so if you place all these discoveries in asteroid, then you find here the Apollo family, which is Earth crossing, which are somewhere here because it comes to 1 astronomical unit. The Earth, then there's a Mars crossing. Then this is the asteroid belt, 2.8 astronomical units. Ceres is somewhere here, exactly at 2.8, as you can see. Eros, etc. But there's one family of asteroid which is called the Trojan asteroid, and what you see is that they are into 1:1 ratio. That means they have the same orbit like Jupiter. Now, I will slightly go into little mathematics. It's not too much, but when we are calculating and talking about the orbits, we have to consider this 3-body problem. Very interesting problem. See, if you have 2 bodies, that is, there are 2 independent bodies which are rotating around each other, their orbits can be completely given by Newton's gravitational theory, which we talked about earlier in case of Keplerian law and then Newton's gravitational theory. Okay. And then they follow a very straightforward. That is, if you have these bodies will follow elliptical orbits and they will rotate around common center of mass. In this case here, these objects are rotating around this center. And in this particular case, actually the center is inside the larger body, but still the larger body is rotating. But when we talk about 3-body problem, when you introduce one more body, then their trajectories are what is called a not closed curves. Okay, but even after saying that, there's a specific solution that exists under these conditions. Okay, that is, if you consider that nearly entire mass of that system is concentrated in one body, okay, which you will call a central body, then the intermediate bodies has a near circular orbit. The orbit has to be elliptical, but very near circular orbit. That is like what we have between Sun and Earth. It's a near circular orbit. And third is that third body has a negligible mass with respect to other 2. That is, the other 2 bodies, the mass of a third body is absolutely negligible. Okay. Now, these considerations were situation. This third 3-body problem was considered by Lagrange. And he gave one very interesting solution, and he said that there could be there would be 5 points between the 2 bodies, and where the gravitational pull of these 2 bodies would be equal. So there's a here. Suppose this is Sun and this is Earth. Then at this particular point, gravitational pull of Sun and Earth would be same. Gravitational pull of Sun and Earth at this point also would be same. You see, this is because the gravity pull. See, it's a 1 over r square at it as it goes. Then there is a 1 point here where the gravitational pull would be same. And similarly, there are L4 and L5 point where the gravitational pulls of these 2 bodies will be same. Okay. Now, the L4 and L5, they are the stable points. Whereas this L1, L2, and L3 are what is called in the metastable position. Now, I must also tell you that this L2 and L1 and L2, these Lagrangian points are used by astronomers. Okay, this is not exactly a mathematical point, but it's a certain region. And this region is used in the by the space rocket science people to put their satellites here, so that without doing much of a work, they can keep observing the sun. And you will see how. Okay, so let us talk about what is the stable situation. If you consider this as a mountain and a valley, so if you put something here, it is in a very stable situation. It doesn't go here or there. It just remains here. Whereas if you put an object on the mountain top or hill, okay, this is a very unstable position. Any moment it will roll either on this side or the other side. Whereas metastable position is something like this. There's a small dent there, so object remains there, but if more push is given, it will either roll and go away. It will roll on this side and go away permanently, or roll on the right hand side and remain stable. Okay, and these are the places, these Trojan asteroids, these are the places where these L4 and L5 very stable positions. So you have, if asteroid for whatever reason come into this region, then it remains stable and they follow the same orbit that of a Jupiter. So these are called the Trojan. The name has come from the historical, the Trojan War, the horses, and these called the Trojan asteroids. By the way, let me just also tell you that if you discover an asteroid, then you have a right to name that particular asteroid. However, there are certain conditions by which you cannot name that asteroid, or the names are fixed. That is, if you discovered a Trojan asteroid, then that asteroid would get the name after Trojan warriors. So there are certain rules by which how these astronomers go. But anyway, so these are the Trojan asteroids, and they follow the thing. People have found the Trojan satellites around Saturn. There's one Trojan asteroid which was discovered in 2011 by NASA, and which is the Trojan of Earth. And so Earth also has one Trojan satellite. Okay, but now we'll take a break here and move to another object in our discussion, and that is these nice lines by this Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Shakespeare's novel Julius Caesar, in Act 2, Scene 2, which is written in 1599, and that it says that when beggars die, there are no comets seen. The heavens blaze themselves, and Princess Diana. So this was the very famous line from Julius Caesar, and it is talking about the assassination of Julius Caesar by his dear friend, that is the Brutus, and this happened. It's a real thing, a documented thing in 444 BC. Point was that people believed that comets were bad luck, and comets would bring bad omen for people who, or rather, if the comet is seen in the sky, it is a bad omen for the ruler. As you can also see here in 1066 AD, that is the Bayeux Tapestry. It's a very famous tapestry in which the war between William the Conqueror and King Harold, which took place, and actually King Harold lost the battle even though he was powerful, but just because a comet was seen, he got scared and he lost the battle. So one point to say is that he lost the battle to. Actually, comet is here. This is the comet, which is recorded on this tapestry. So he talked about that. So you can also say that King William the Conqueror won because there was a comet. So comets don't bring the good luck or bad luck, but they happen to be there and worth enjoying. Anyway, so let us see what are the earlier thoughts about the comet themselves. Aristotle thought that these are atmospheric phenomena. In upper atmosphere, when hot and dry exhalation gathered, combined together, they burst into flame and the comets are born, which was rather too absurd, but Aristotle was Aristotle and whatever he said remained. And it took Seneca almost 300 years to come and say that since the comet moved regularly through the sky, undisturbed by the wind, so they cannot be part of our planet or atmosphere, or there must be something beyond atmosphere. And then Tycho Brahe, who was actually the employer of Johannes Kepler, he demonstrated that the comet must exist out of outside the atmosphere of Earth, because he observed from two different stations the same comet and found a parallax, that is the comet with respect to background star has moved slightly, So it must be, it did not move very much. So therefore, the comet must be beyond atmosphere. If it was in the atmosphere, then looking at from two different places, the position of comet with respect to star would change. But the beginning of cometary astronomy started with Johannes Kepler's, by Edmund Halley. What he did was that Newton's equations, actually Newton was trying to find the orbits of comet, which he later on requested his friend Edmund Halley to calculate the orbits of comet. And what Edmund Halley found was that comet of 1531, 1607 and 1682 were almost identical. And he made a very bold statement, which was a major statement of its time. And he predicted, and he said that comet would reappear again in 1758 or 59. He said that the comet has a periodicity of 76 years, 68 years or so. And he gave the prediction. He said the comet would reappear again. Okay. Comet did appear again, but actually people also ridiculed Edmund Halley, saying that look, it will not come back, and he is talking rubbish and so on and so forth. But comet came, and it was observed, picked up on 25th of December 1758. Well, comets all also bringing bad luck, but now that they thought that comets would come and destroy the Earth, so there were cartoons like this. But then when again the comet came in 1910, it was a big kind of a celebration, because life had changed quite a lot by then, and a big celebration. As you see, the greeting cards were made to be wishing each other, and which had these comet faces on it. Then people also utilized this comet for their own purposes. Like some people sold this comet pills. Why they sold the comet pills was that time they found that Earth would pass through the comet's tail. And we will also come to that. Earth would pass through comet's tail, and they thought that comet has a lot of poisonous gas. And they started anti-comet pills. And see, the cost was not small, $1 per, I don't know whether it's a $1 per pill, which is quite an expensive thing. Okay. So these people are selling only 25 cents and so on. So it was an expensive thing. And but people bought it. And what these pills were, they were nothing but sugar and salt. The pills made out of sugar and salt. But people did make some money. Then there were these comments of what this is the German thing, which says, you can read it out. I'm sorry for the women who are here, but this is the cartoon which appeared in some newspaper. He says, old woman, put that umbrella. When comet sees your face, the earth will be saved. That kind of joke. Pear soap, which is still now in the market, actually sold and said that comet appear, but once in 75, 76 years. But Pear soap will be visible every day. It is visible even today. And then things like people gave the safety razor, this kind of a thing. And then, okay, if you like something alcoholic, then comet whiskey also was. Anyway, so the comet came and went. And now today, the comet has almost reached the upper end, and then it will start from 2024, it will start moving towards the sun again. And somewhere here, when in 2060 or so, we will start 2060, 2061, Halley's comet will be seen again. Okay, what these comets are? See, the comet, we knew initially, the comet people talked about gas and so on. By the way, I must also tell you that comet name comes from Stella Coma. That is, a stella is a star and coma is a hair. A star with the hair is Stella Coma or comet. Okay. So Fred Whipple is a very famous astronomer. And he, some of you remember that the first director of Indian Institute of Astrophysics, Professor Venu Bapu, he was there, and where Fred Whipple was teaching at the same time. Okay. So when the spectroscopic observations were taken, they found that the comet is composed of rocks, water, frozen gases, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and so on. And he coined this word that comets are like the dirty snowballs. He coins it. So what the comets are? So now let us see here that we start from here, that the comet, when it is outer region away from the sun, it is a very solid, cold body. Okay. But as it comes closer to the sun, it sublimates. That is, the material from a solid state directly gets converted into the gaseous state, and coma begins. A small envelope of gas surrounds the comet. Then as it comes closer to the sun, okay, the tail get pushed away at about one astronomical unit, that is Earth Sun distance. The tail pushes away. Now the tail has two parts, what is called the dust tail and ion tail or plasma tail. Okay, the plasma tail is exactly opposite side, and dust tail also follows. Now this is a very exaggerated view, but you have to see that the dust tails are the small particles. So this comet, which is a packed up material of silicates, and as I told you earlier, so this material breaks up or comes out of the comet, and then these tails are formed. Then here, as it passes closer to the sun, the small debris of comet, which are this material which is thrown off and gets lost into the interplanetary medium. But some of this material also follows the comet's orbit. The dust remains behind the comet, and as the comet goes away, the tail starts shrinking, and this is all it happens. But this dusty particle, this small stony material, also follows the cometary orbit. Now, if you see the distance is something like, this is the sun, and it is approximately 100 million kilometers. Now remember that Earth-Sun distance is 150 million kilometers. The icy nucleus is a very small, 1 to 10 kilometers in diameter, but the coma can be almost 1 million kilometers. It's a very thin, very transparent, the density is very low, but it pushes up to a much larger extent. And then this ionic or hydrogen envelope, which can be as much as 10 million kilometers in size. Now here's another picture where it shows that this is a gaseous tail, which is pointing exactly opposite direction to the sun, whereas dust tail kind of follows the path of the comet. Now this time, last time, the 86, when the comet came, the space exploration, so rockets were sent, and there was this satellite Giotto, which took pictures of comet Halley, and it turned out to be 16 by 8 by 8 kilometers, a shape something like this. Okay, they call it like a peanut shaped comet. So what you are seeing here is, this is the Halley's comet, and then dust and ion tails are coming out, whereas this is on the dark side and comet is rotating. So this was taken on 14th of March. Now we go to the third object in our discussion, and that is the meteor or shooting stars. We will talk a little bit more about comets very soon. Okay. So meteor, or the streak of light that you see in the sky, okay, and people would call it as a shooting star. What happens is that not only asteroids in the orbiting the sun, but there are a large number of small particles. As I told you that there could be a collision between the asteroids, and small dust particle would get scattered, and they will travel and here and there in the interplanetary medium, okay, at a very high speed, okay. And then when such a particle enters into the atmosphere of the Earth, due to very high friction, they burn, and what you see is a streak of light. Okay. Now there is certain definition or certain terms which are associated to it, that such particles, small particles, are called meteorites. Like we have asteroid, so they are meteorites. So when you say meteorites, they are just like a few millimeters in diameter, a very small grain, which are there between interplanetary medium. Then if the meteorite is a bigger, Okay, it can produce a bigger in a sense, like a few more, instead of a few millimeters, about a centimeter in diameter. It can produce a big flash of light, and it is called fireball. Sometimes the fireball is seen even during the daytime. And then it can this it's if the size is slightly even larger, then it can make a noise, which supersonic noise, which you can hear, and also it may explode in the sky, and these are called bolides. I'll show you a couple of one picture of a boloidal entry of an asteroid. But when this body falls on the ground and it is picked up, it is meteorite. So it does happen that these bodies fall on the ground, and you can pick up these stones. Okay, but once you pick a stone is picked up, the meteorites are classified into three broad categories: iron, stone, iron, and stony iron meteorites. So they resemble the stony meteorites are almost 90% of all meteorites, okay, but very difficult to identify because of their stone-like structure, and which is very similar. And you can actually, if you find something, then it has what is called the fusion crest, which would produce, melting thing on the surface of the meteorite. Iron ones are very easy. They are 6% of it, and it has nickel, almost 90% of iron, and 6% of nickel in it, and some other material. Now, there's a nice story associated with it, and that is there was one iron meteorite which fell close to Jalandhar in Punjab, and in 1620. And it was picked up, and Jahangir asked one of his artisan to make metal out of weapons out of it. So what he found was that the composition of this material was rather less dense. Okay, and then he required to put it a little bit more iron. So he says that he added 1 part of iron to 3 part of meteorite material to make 2 swords, 1 knife, and 1 dagger. And this particular dagger is it's available in this Freer Art of the Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. So this is how it was made. The weapon was made. Now, the stony iron meteorite would have both stone as well as iron material. And interesting thing is that these are very important material to study, because when you cut them and polish them, what you find is a crystalline structure. So what you know is that these chunks of material were actually formed during the formation of solar system. So study of these meteorites will also give you the clues which are present during the formation of the solar system. Now, this meteor, a shower, that is, now we go back again to 1833, way back about 1833. Then on the night of 13th of November 1833, in the North America, people saw a major shower, a large number of meteors coming in the night, one after the other. And it was such a fantastic show that people woke up in the middle of the night and they rushed out to see this. Some people were scared to see a large number of bright meteor coming down. But fortunately, no one was hurt. The display was in the sky, and it didn't seem to have reached the ground. There was one person, Professor Denison Olmsted, who was there at that time, and what he did was that he very carefully observed this display, and then he also went to the nearby villages or nearby cities and talked to a large number of people, and he estimated that during this period, just about in 1 hour, 150,000 meteors must have come. And then he ventured into saying that possibly there is a cloud of a meteor which is there and which interacted with Earth, and then you have a shower of meteors. Now, as time progressed, and in between, he also found that these meteors appear to be coming from the constellation of the head of Leo constellation. Okay. Now, this phenomena repeated again after about 33 years. And again, 33 years, it was a big major meteor shower. And finally, what people realize is that this shower was this 33-year period was found the association between comet Tempel-Tuttle and the meteor shower. So astronomers realized that possibly is the debris of comet Tempel-Tuttle which are left behind, and as Earth enters into the debris of this comet, you get large number of meteors taking place. It's like this. And what happens is that meteor appear to come from a particular direction in the sky. Okay. Of course, the stream is parallel, and the standard example that we give is this, that if you are in the middle of a railway track, something like this, that everything appears to be originated from center here. So similarly, in this case also, even though the stream is parallel, but because it is coming from a particular direction, you see, or rather you trace back the stream, it goes to a point, and the point where the meteor appear to come, it is called radiant. And the radiant, in the constellation that it lies, it is the meteor shower is identified by that particular constellation. So if it is in the Leo constellation, it is Leonid, Geminid, and so on and so forth. So here are some few more meteor showers. Okay, this is the Perseid shower, which take place during the Swift-Tuttle. Okay, the Swift-Tuttle is the Swift and Tuttle. They discovered this particular comet, and this happens on 12th of August, which is actually a very brilliant meteor shower. But from India, we always miss it because of it's a monsoon period. Then comet Halley itself produces two meteor showers. One is on May 6th, and another one is on close to October 11. And that is because Halley's comet actually intersects the orbit of Earth at two places. So it happens in Orionite. In this case, it is in the constellation of Orion, and then it is Aquarius. Why it is called Aquarius is because in Aquarius you have two meteor shower. So this particular radiant is close to Eta Aquarius, so it is identified as Eta Aquarius. And here are there are large number of, there are hundreds of showers, but the major meteor showers are these. The first one that happens in the year is Quadrantide. Quadrantide was actually a French name, French constellation, which we don't use anymore. But now this particular radiant lies in Draco, somewhere very between Bootes and Ursa Major, and it peaks on 3rd of January. And what you see is that it gives about 40 meteors per hour. It is what is called the zenithal hourly rate. Now, one must remember when we talk about zenithal hourly rate is that how it is calculated, because how many meteors you would see depends upon your eyesight, the atmospheric conditions, and so on. How well above the horizon the radiant is, and there are other factors. So meteor shower observers have defined what is called the zenithal hourly rate. And what the zenithal hourly rate tells you is that if the sky is clear and your radiant is right at zenith, that is point right over the observer, then this is a zenith. Then you would see something like 40 meteors coming from quadrantides. Now, the reason I'm taking this little more time to explain zenithal hourly rate is because a number of times you would have seen in the newspaper, people talk about meteor shower and say that, okay, you will see 40 meteors. Now, 40 meteor is something like 1.5 meteor per minute. Okay, but that will not happen because if the radiant is low, you will see less number of meteors. Okay, so zenithal hourly rate is a mathematical number which you would see when it is right overhead. Then you have this Lyrids meteor, which is on a peak on April 22nd. It's due to comet Thatcher. And I told you that's Eta Aquarids and Delta Aquarids in the Aquarius constellation. Perseids are very good shower, which we just talked about them, is the Swift-Tuttle. Then Orionids are Halley's comet. And then two important comets, showers are Leonid and Geminids. Now, Leonids have become faint. They were active few years ago, 1998, there was a major shower, and after that, now it will come back again after 20 years or so. So this is due to comet Temple Turtle. But Geminids are the most faithful ones. Every year, close to 14th of December, these comet come, and this meteor shower comes, and this is due to this Pantheon, the asteroid 3200 Pantheon. So this asteroid is actually a dead comet. This comet has now no more material to give out the tail or coma, and so now it is classified as an asteroid. Okay, so how to observe this meteor shower? Meteor shower, or how do we see in these observations of meteor shower and the kind of meteors there are, their speeds and direction, etc. So you know that Earth moves in its orbit at about the rate of 30 kilometers per second. The sunlight is coming from this direction, so this is a day part of it. This is midnight. If you're observing here, there is a sun is about to rise. Here the sun has set, and so. So at this position, the meteor travels something like 40 kilometers per second, by and large. Okay. So if you're observing in the evening, after the sunset, then what you find is that comet has to overtake you. And so 40 minus 30, about 10 kilometers per second. So when you generally, the meteors in the night, evening sky, before midnight, they are the slow moving meteors. Because you see there, you can subtract these two numbers, you get about 10 kilometers per second. Also remember that this is the observer. Suppose observer is here, then this is the observer's horizon, and this is the part of the sky which is available to the observer. Whereas if you see the early morning meteors, which is the sunrise, okay, then because it is a head-on, the velocities get added, and then you have the meteors plunging into the atmosphere at the rate of something like 70 kilometers per second. Actually, people put this number as 42 kilometers per second, so it comes out to be about 72 kilometers per second. But that is the kind of a speed they come. So Geminids, which are seen in the morning sky, are fantastic ones. They are fast-moving, very colorful meteor, and a long distance you see them because they're still very bright. Okay. Now, something little more associated with comet is that cometary debris, like meteor shower, or also can bring the microorganism. This was proposed by Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe. They hypothesized that possibly the life could be brought to from one planet to another, taken from one planet to another by comet, because the seed of life could be in the on the cometary dust, and when the cometary dust enters the atmosphere of Earth, okay, it brings the life. Now these meteorites, comets, etc., they also come and hit the Earth. And we have some signatures like this. This is the Barringer crater in Arizona. It's a very famous crater. And then another crater is there in very close to where we live. It is in Buldhana district of Maharashtra, where this crater, this is an aerial picture of this crater. It is filled with water. This is the only crater in this category where it is filled with water, and there is a lake here. Okay. And I must also tell you that if you fly from between Mumbai and Nagpur, or Mumbai and Raipur, you often see, I mean, if you go from Mumbai to Raipur or Nagpur, try and sit on the right-hand side window of the aircraft, and you will notice this particular crater. Unfortunately, I haven't heard pilots actually pointing out to people that you are seeing this famous crater. They should do that, but you can see this crater. Now, this Lonar and Barringer crater, just if you give the comparison, Lonar crater is slightly bigger. It's not too deep compared to Barringer, but probably there is a much depth because it's filled with water. And age is, people haven't measured their age, calculated their age, but it is something like 35 to 40,000 years or so, which is Barringer is 50,000 years or so, 35 to 50,000 years. Okay, now these were the major impact, but there was one interesting event that took place on 30th of June 1909, and to mark this event, the Asteroid Day is celebrated. And that event is that at Tungushka in the Siberian desert, okay, a major explosion took place. And what people found was that in the trees and trees were fallen on the opposite sides. Okay. Now that was the period of Cold War between Russia and others. Russia was Iron Curtain, so no one could go there. So not much research was done. But then eventually it was realized that possibly the reason for such an explosion and tree falling on the other side is that possibly a comet which must have grazed the Earth. There's another chance photograph. Actually, it was a video, and it was published in Sky and Telescope magazine. A series of pictures from that. This is a 8mm handheld camera. The pictures were taken, and what was seen is that over lake, this person was filming the thing, and he saw this particular object moving. This is sorry. So this object, later on after taking observation, it was found that it must have been about 150 feet in diameter, which is quite a large, but it is a daytime missile that was seen, a celestial missile that was seen crossing the Earth's atmosphere. Now, on the other side of the research world, there were people geological people who do the geological survey, geophysicists were doing research, and what they found was that this is what is called the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary in Earth's atmosphere on the Earth's soil, and what they found was that this particular boundary has a rich element called iridium, and then this is a very rich, about few millimeters thick. In fact, if you, some of you, if you come to Nehru Planetarium in Mumbai, we can actually show you the sample of this iridium material. Now, when they aged this particular layer of Earth, they found that it is close to 60 million years or so, and this possibly the end of dinosaurs, that is mass extinction, was possibly due to a meteorite or big meteorite or asteroid coming and hitting the Earth, a small asteroid coming and hitting the Earth, and threw a lot of dust in the atmosphere, and possibly that must have killed the dinosaurs or had mass extinction. Nearly 75% of species died at that time. Okay, so there appears to be a relation between the two. Now, talking about asteroids again, back to asteroids again. Asteroids, people did not pay so much of attention. Astronomers did not pay any attention to asteroids. In fact, they thought that they are vermin in the sky, something which is bad. And that is but natural that you are trying to take a picture of, say, Andromeda galaxy. And now today, if you take a picture and a meteor or asteroid crosses, you will feel very thrilled about it. But in those days, you are trying to take a picture of Andromeda galaxy and asteroid crosses, and then you feel that photograph is completely spoiled. And you also see that this number of asteroids by about 1987 had gone only up to 5,000. So people did not really like this. Astronomers did not like this very much, observing this asteroid. However, there were some people who were looking for meteorites and asteroids in the sky. Would you please excuse me? I'll just be back in a minute.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I had to go ahead. Okay.
Network
So this
problem.
Sorry?
Network problem.
A bit of network problem, yeah.
I can hear you, sir.
But can you see my picture?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm going
Okay,
to
that
get
doesn't matter.
Yeah, now you can see the picture. You can see the slide now?
I think you can continue.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, two events which came and brought the attention of astronomers and scientists to look for the asteroids. And the first event was in 1994, that there was comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. Why Shoemaker-Levy 9 is because this husband and wife team, Caroline and Eugene Shoemaker and David Levy, they discovered some large number of asteroids and comets. And this was their 9th comet which they discovered, which was on March 24, 1993. And this is the discovery. So no, this is not the discovery image. So when they discovered the thing, they actually reported to the Space Watch telescope, and they said that, look, we have seen a comet which looked like a squashed caterpillar. Can you take a look? So when the photograph was taken, deep sky photograph, so long exposure photograph, this is how the comet looked like. And then further observation showed that this particular comet was broken into large number of 21 pieces. Okay, and 21 fragments. And these fragments fell into Jupiter about between 16th of July and 22nd July 1994. Now, this was a major thing in the news. I must also tell you, some of you would like to hear this, and that is that was the period when internet was just about coming. And IUCAA had a very special internet line, and not many organizations in the country had this internet. And I remember very vividly that when this event came, we became almost a news clearing house for the country, where every time there was a image like this or news from NASA, we would download it immediately and pass it on to the press. So for the first time, press had almost online. Now, of course, it is common, but at that time, press could get the images very quickly through IUCAA. Well, another thing that you notice is that people who have been observing Jupiter, they have seen this great red spot on Jupiter. So when this comet pieces started falling in the Jupiter, people thought that possibly this red great spot must have got created because of such impact. But today we do not have any proper answer why this great red spot is, because later on this impact regions point on the Jupiter gone away. Press in Pune at least I have seen this is in Pune newspaper. Yeah, that was, you remember, this is July, so rainy season, and there were these potholes. So this cartoon in the newspaper in Pune says that we have changed the name of this road to Shoemaker Mark because it has 21 big potholes. So potholes are there in our cities, and this is how the cartoon was placed in the newspaper. The second important thing was that US military had put a satellite in the space because they thought that there is a Russian nuclear explosions and they wanted to check this explosion in the upper atmosphere. And they detected large number of such events. Okay, and they thought first that it is possibly the nuclear explosion, but then that was not so. And they opened this data and found that these explosions were not because of nuclear ones, but because of 10-meter class meteors coming and hitting the atmosphere. Now, why this is important is that these asteroids with a diameter of about 7 meters, if it enters the Earth's atmosphere, then it gives out a kinetic energy of a little boy. Little boy is the atomic bomb which was dropped on Hiroshima, which is approximately 16 kilotons of TNT. So it's a big thing. So now there is a positive scare that yes, we need to look into that. And then large number of organizations came up looking for such automated telescope. And I told you in the beginning that earlier at some point that a new device called the CCD device started coming into the market, charge coupled device. It was a new device in that, it was newly discovered. And CCD was made as a memory device, but found its usage in recording the images and became a very powerful image recording device. And why it was powerful from many senses, I was telling you that if you use a camera, it takes certain amount of time. Sometimes even in the laboratories, photographic laboratories, excuse me, photographic laboratories, when we take observations for 1 hour, but get the picture in our hand, it would take almost 10 to 12 minutes, because photographic plate had to be developed, washed, fixed, and dried, and then astronomer can actually see the photograph. In this case, now as you know that right now we are also talking live with each other on the electronic mode. So two major telescopes which took part. The one telescope is Spacewatch, which has still about 1920 has done 130,500 asteroid. This telescope has discovered, automated telescope. And then there is a linear telescope which has discovered more number of asteroids. And you can see how small this telescope is. It's completely automated, and it started discovering more asteroids. Now, as far as the asteroids are concerned, the asteroids are given name by a person who discovers. So when we were introduced, so the name was given by the team to different asteroids, like the way we named the asteroid Ramanujan, the first asteroid that was discovered. People have given names of their fiancé, dog, cats, all sorts of names. But there is certain rule, as I was telling you in the case of Trojan asteroids. So these people, linear telescope, which is the observatory people, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So now what they started doing is that they conduct various competitions, and the winners of the competition are given names. And one of the first name I remember was given to a girl who stood second, was her Hamsa Padmanabhan. So that asteroid is known by her name, Hamsa Padmanabhan. Now, very recently, another major event which took place was on the morning of 15th of February 2030, where a big asteroid or big meteorite which entered into the Earth's atmosphere. And this is a very loud noise. About 1,000 people were affected. It was a small village in Russia, and 1,000 people were affected. There was a lot of big noise. The glass window panes were broken, and so on. So this is this search for such objects has become certainly very important, because it could be life-threatening. And how it could be life-threatening is this particular slide shows you that the kind of size. Now you see this Beringer crater asteroid, or say for our in the case of Lunar crater, very similar kind of meteorite, about 50-meter diameter. It can make an explosion of something like 10 megaton. This Russian thing was something like 7 meters in diameter, and 500 kilotons of energy it would release. And their sizes are smaller than some of the aircrafts. So you can see that even the small object at that high speed, when it enters the atmosphere, it can be a very devastating. A meteorite like this falling in the sea can bring big tsunamis and so on. So search for such asteroid and objects has become a very important task and engineering task, and people are talking about how to save the asteroids if at all someone is coming and going to hit the Earth. And one of the ideas which was put forward is that if you see an asteroid coming towards the Earth, then it is not quite a nice thing to destroy it by nuclear weapon. But what you could do is that either you can put another body, a heavy body, so there will be a gravitational interaction between the two. And since this heavy body, you can control it from Earth, you can slightly nudge this body, and this asteroid which is coming, slightly nudge it so that its direction is changed and it passes over away from the Earth's atmosphere. That is one possibility. Second possibility people talked about is that instead of blasting it away, create an explosion very close to it. So once again, its thing can be direction can be changed. So There are people who are really working on these kind of projects. There are people who are actually looking for these asteroids, near Earth asteroids, or sometimes what we call is PHA, potentially hazardous asteroids, which could come and hit the Earth. But this threat is actually real. I'm coming to the end. This topic I just want to end because this question is often asked, and then end with one particular topic, and that is the dwarf planet. Because excuse me, when Pluto was discovered, people realized that it did not fit into the category of planets. It was much too small. And in 2006, International Astronomical Union actually removed the status of Pluto from, excuse me, from planet, and a new category was made, dwarf planet. And the dwarf planet, the properties of dwarf planets are given as follows, or rather not dwarf planet, but excuse me. Okay. Property of planet is that it is in orbit around the sun. Then it has sufficient mass that on its own it would form into a rigid body, and it is in the hydrostatic equilibrium. That is, it is nearly round in shape. Okay. It has not cleared the neighborhood around the orbit. See, if you see the planets, all the planets. So sorry, we are talking about dwarf planets. So if you see the orbit of Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, etc., there are no objects in between. Whereas if you see Ceres has a large number of other asteroids also. Okay, so it has not cleared the neighborhood in its orbit. Okay, and it is not a satellite of another body. Okay, so satellite that is Moon cannot be called dwarf planet, or there are planets which are satellites of Jupiter, they cannot be called dwarf planet. So under the category of dwarf planet, we have Ceres and Pluto are put in the category of dwarf planet. So these are the thing. The subject is very extensive. So I could not have done total justice to it, because each this topic is that is meteors, comets, and asteroids. They are each independent topics, but this is a general overview of these minor bodies in our solar system. So with this, I would like to stop here and thank you. And if there are questions, I will be happy to take those.
Yeah, please. Audience, from the audience side, you can ask questions. Actually, the Adda is about questions and queries. You can clear your doubts.
Can I stop sharing the slide now?
Yeah, you can talk. You can stop.
Okay.
You can stop.
Yeah.
Even if somebody is not able to speak, you can type the question in the chat box, and we can get it from there.
And I am at the advantage of so many experts here. So even if I can't answer, there are Manas Bhakti. People are there. So I'll be happy to request them to answer the question if I can't.
And audience, if you want to ask the questions in other languages also, like Hindi or
Hindi, Bengali,
Malayalam, some of the so you can ask, we will translate, somebody will translate. Yeah, it is an Adda, and be free to ask questions. Yeah, there is a question from Subhan Barik. He asks that how can we get notified about further. It is not a question. That we will come back to it.
It is for you.
Yeah, that we will.
No, maybe you can answer it out, because it's our activity.
Yeah, the thing is that see, this is a joint venture with the Regional Science Center Planetarium and Astronomical Society of India's Public Outreach and Education Committee, and it is a monthly program for all. There is no bar; anybody can attend this, and it is advertised in all the digital media. and through websites, to Facebook, and through WhatsApp groups and all those things, and press also. So you can look out in all these medias of our Regional Science Center and POEC, and you can get informed about it. Okay, so other questions in context of today's topic, that will be more good adda. Anybody?
Or you can also criticize. I mean, this is a
You can also say something.
What you haven't.
Anita Sharma has asked that, sir, is it true that there are some evidences about life on asteroids?
Actually, no. See, asteroids are in a dark region of the solar system and the cold region of solar system, and we have not seen any evidence of life on these asteroids. However, I must also would like to point out that it has happened in past that asteroid hitting a planet Mars. Okay, it hits a planet, and the stone actually has entered, and people found some meteorite sample in the southern part of that is the Antarctica, where there was appeared to be some signature of life form, but eventually it was proved that that is not life there. So there is no evidence of life seen on the asteroids.
Okay, there is one more question from Subham Barik. How can we recognize the stone asteroids?
That's a very nice question, Shubham, and I should have answered there and then. The thing is that, yes, stony meteors are very difficult to identify because they almost appear like a stone on Earth. Okay, but what we normally do is that if you have a suspect, first of all, this stone meteor would also have some iron particles in it. So if you take it close to some magnet, it will show up that, or rather say a compass or something, then needle would show up. Okay, but I'm sorry. So what people do is that they cut this asteroid using a particular method of cutting the stone particles, meteorite. They cut them and then polish it. And once you cut them and polish this, you find there is a fine structure inside it. Okay, and the stony meteor would also show you that there are some iron pieces in there. Because these are not exactly stone or exactly iron. It's a complete mixture of these things. So you will find signatures of that, and that is how one would find out that it is a piece of asteroid or not. A. Second thing is that people also would do the carbon dating. And by doing the dating process, you know how old it is. So it's possibly its origin is the celestial origin, and rather and not it is. I mean, okay, it has come from the space.
There is one more question from Ashirwad Tilu. He asks that sometimes there's news about NASA acknowledging youngsters to discover asteroid based on their data. What exactly was done by the youngsters?
Okay, thank you very much. It is not only for youngsters, but actually it is for everybody. They have what is called the citizen science, and not only just NASA, but many other people have what is they call the citizen science program, where you will log into their database. You see, a large number of sky pictures are taken. So you log into their database and then try and discover these asteroids. And once you discover, very recently from India also, I think our Prime Minister acknowledged one lady from Andhra who actually discovered about 6 asteroids using the NASA database. Then another person is IIT Mumbai has a very strong team they're actually observing something else, but in the process, they also look for new asteroids, and they have discovered new asteroids, and they were given Astronomical Society of India recognized their efforts. So it's an India-based thing. So people are working out to find more and more asteroids. Even though the computational techniques are fast to discover automatically, and yet computer misses out. The human brain is rather still very strong, and youngsters are given, or not youngsters, as I was telling you, anybody can get into it, and maybe in one of the future addas, Jayanta, we can invite someone to talk about the citizen science project, where not just asteroid but other objects also can be, how they look for other objects, like categorize, classifies galaxies and things like that.
Yeah, we can do it.
I suppose we are also late. I didn't realize that it is already 6:45, 40.
It doesn't matter. Adda can go on any long, actually.
Yeah.
We have in our Calcutta addas going on for hours after hours. so it doesn't matter. Yeah, if you have any question, you can go ahead with your questions, and I think for some more time we can answer. I would like to put up one question, is that before I give it to this one. See, this comet, this Halley comet you have said, no, it reviews, I mean, it returns after around 75 years and 2060. But there should be some mass depletion in each when it goes near the sun and returns. So due to tidal force, it may be. So whether any studies on these aspects, because we know we can calculate its mass and all, and when it is near the sun, it will deplete some mass and something will get. So whether it will rupture or something, whether any studies of this type has been conducted, or when
You're right. I think there were some predictions about how many more orbits this comet Halley would go around the sun, for how many more orbits appear, not appear, how many more number of times the comet will come closer to the sun. But I'm sorry, I don't recollect the data just as yet. But because it's a very large comet, it's a large comet, so it is going to last, and then you see it comes after 76 years or so. So probably it will last for many generations of us.
Yeah. Then we have a question from Swati. How long can a comet last?
Yeah, so you're right in this question that comet, I told you there is this comet Pantheon, which was a comet, asteroid Pantheon, which was a comet at one point in time, and then now it is a stony material, which gives out the meteor shower of Geminids. So that particular comet is dead. So there is no particular hard and fast rule how long the comet would last. But every time the comet comes closer, it just, as we were talking about, it loses its mass and it becomes smaller and smaller, it keeps losing its mass, and eventually it is left out only with the stony material in it, and these debris are left behind in the orbit. So there is no particular data that it is saying that how long a comet can last. But having said that, as a comet comes closer to the Earth, normally you see the comet for about a month, in the sense that once a comet starts seeing above the visible horizon, on the horizon, the comet is generally visible for about a few months with its tail coming out.
Okay, and then we have one question from Sulu. Sir,
Yeah.
there are there still unidentified elements on asteroids?
You are a very nice question again, Sulu. That Sulu Foods, so probably it's some organization. Okay, so I think people have tried to do spectroscopy to find out. See, asteroids are dead bodies themselves. So to get information from the asteroids by itself would be very difficult, that you will have to go to that asteroid, mine it. But theoretically, when people talk, people also believe that asteroids could be rich in some precious material. And it might be and so in future, there will be a time when there'll be miners or space miners who will go to asteroids to mine the asteroid and bring back this precious material. Because you see, these asteroids were formed, or comets were formed, at the time of solar system was born. And though I do not wish to go into the formation of solar system, but please remember that sun is a second or possibly actually third generation star. If the star is born out of just hydrogen and helium, then we would not have been here. But what possibly had happened was that first a star was born which had only hydrogen and helium. Then as the star evolved, it shrank and more and heavier elements were made. And at some place, these elements, heavier elements, were thrown out in the space in the form of a supernova explosion that triggered another star formation. So sun is possibly third generation star, star, and which has this rich material. Now, you remember when I showed you that formation of a solar system slide, that there was a huge cloud of gas and so on. So this material which we see on Earth and which we see in these comets or meteorite, this was formed at the time of solar system was born. So by capturing these meteorites and studying comets, we also get the idea as, of course, comet actually can go into other stars also. So we are talking about short period comets, which are there in our solar system. And by studying them, we know what kind of conditions might have existed at the time when the solar system was born. So from that point of view, these are very important studies.
We have another question. We have a question from Aman MB. It says that, how does dark matter and dark energy affect the expansion of the universe? It is an out of context question.
But I also don't know the answer. This is not my field of study. And giving something wrong answer is not a right thing on anyone's part. So I wouldn't.
Let us give this question for other astronomers.
That's right. Yes, you are absolutely correct.
This topic will be addressed. Yeah. So any other questions we have for today? Yeah. So, okay. Yeah, there is one question. Where are the group of comets and where are the groups of comets located, like asteroids are located in between Mars and Jupiter? Yeah.
Okay, Shubham, here this is another missed out slide. So when the solar system was born, there was Professor John Wood. He said that possibly there is a cloud of gas or cloud of material, cometary material around the sun, say about 200 or 5,000 astronomical units from the sun. Therefore, 500 times distance between Earth and the sun, and it's a huge cloud where the comets are. Okay, and whenever there is something nudges, gravitational thing, it gets pulled and it starts coming rushing towards the sun. So this is called the Oort cloud. Then there is a belt which is called the Kuiper belt, which is almost in the plane of sun's rotation, or the sun's equatorial plane. And Oort cloud is almost about something like 3 dimension. It's a ball-like thing. Let me just check if I can find that. Or maybe you can check out the pictures of Oort cloud. If you don't mind, let me just check this. If I have this slide, I will show you. So this cometary material has come from there, and something that happens. Yeah, it is here. So let me bring this slide. I'm going to share a window. Now you see here, I'm not putting the slideshow because it gives a problem. Okay, so this is solar system, which is here. There's a Kuiper belt, and the outer solar system and planetary orbit, it is shown. Okay, then there are other binary things, and this is the Oort cloud. Okay, the Oort cloud and comparison of billions of comets. Now, when you say billions of comet and all that, they're much too small. And if you talk about the solar system itself, it's almost a vacuum. Okay, on this picture it looks so dense and it's covered, but it is not like that. It is almost a vacuum. Actually, there was a time when interplanetary space travel was started. That is when the satellite Galileo was launched. We sent a space probe to Galileo, and it was also named Galileo. Sorry, not Galileo. I'm sorry, Jupiter, and it was named Galileo. So we were wondering that if it is passing the asteroid belt, won't there be a chance of it hitting some asteroid, because the belt seemed to be very thick, but the probability tells you that it is a very little probability that it will get hit by an asteroid. So otherwise it's a vacuum, but yes, there are large number of comets around in the Oort cloud, and these comets can come and go. Another thing to remember here is that these comets, some of these comets which come into the orbit, visit the sun, okay, they get very nicely gravitationally perturbed by the gravity of Saturn and Jupiter. And sometimes a comet can be thrown out of solar system, and then it would go into interstellar medium and probably go to some another star. And that is where people are talking about life could be transported from one star to another, but it's a huge long distances they have to travel. So this can happen also, like Shoemaker-Levy, a comet can be captured by suppose some comet which has come from outer side, it can be captured and put into, and then it becomes part of the solar system. We call this is a long period comet. Sometimes we call them as an open-ended, that is parabolic orbit. Actually, it's not a parabolic, it's a long elliptical orbit, a nearly parabolic orbit. But if the orbit is like that, then it is no more in the influence of the sun, but possibly goes to some another star.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah.
You want to continue?
I just a small the addition to what he said is that yes, there are he said that group of comets are exactly located like asteroid. Collected between Mars and Jupiter. Then also I talked to you about the Trojan satellites, Trojan asteroids, which are there between in the orbit of Jupiter. There are a large number of Trojans, actually more Trojans in the Saturn's Trojan. Also told you there is a Trojan, Earth Trojan, which is discovered. So there are different regions that you have the asteroids.
And we take a last question from Solu. What is the reason for the movement of asteroid, comet, meteor, etc.?
Right. See, the reason is the same thing as you have the planets going around the sun. So the planetary, see, the star was born. I showed you that slide. The star was born, and the planetary system was born. So its angular momentum gets conserved. Okay, and when it becomes shrink, it starts rotating faster. So it has a particular direction, whereas so they generally have the same direction. However, when there are some other bodies which come, or as I was talking to you about the gravity of Jupiter and Saturn, they can influence and change their direction. So as far as the main belt asteroids are concerned, it is the conservation of angular momentum that had started at the time of formation of the solar system. Then comet which come from a long distances from the sun. So their reason for the movement is the gravitational pull. But any motion has the same reason, that is the sun's gravity pulls, and then you have a centrifugal force which is trying to balancing these objects rotate around the sun. And then meteor that you see, these are scattered bodies, like they are vagabonds. Like they are thrown in the interplanetary medium, and they go into various directions. And they being very small, though gravitational pull of sun and other planets do act upon them, but they are just scattered around. And we do have an issue with it. I think you remember that Apollo 13 was hit by a small projectile like that, which came and hit. So the small bodies, which are few millimeters in diameter, are something which are threatening to our interplanetary travel. I suppose we can stop at this.
Yeah, we can stop here, and I would request Joel George from Regional Science Center to formally deliver the vote of thanks.
Hi, Joe.
Good evening, one and all. We had an enlightening session today, and I take this opportunity to extend our sincere thanks to our distinguished guest, Sri Arvind Paranjpai, Director, Nehru Planetarium, Mumbai. It was an excellent session, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I would also like to thank all our viewers who are watching this program in our Google Meet, YouTube, and Facebook channels. Thank you all. We will meet on the next month with another interesting topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining. And maybe, Jayanta, if you can, or maybe I will write it, my email ID.
Yeah.
This is my email ID. Feel free to send me a mail. And we are part of same fraternity, same group. So please feel and ask questions to others in the group, and we'll be very happy to answer those.
Yeah. And
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, and all these AstroAdda video means these sessions are recorded and available in rscpcalicut.virtual in our YouTube channel. So if you want to see again, you can always come back and have a look at it. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks a lot. It was pleasure meeting all of you.
Yeah.